Upinder Bhojani, I think you are so well known, and I consider you as one of the most thoughtful leaders in tobacco control, who always gives a very, very and considered opinion and with great deal of deep thought. So please go ahead. The qualification, etc., are all there, and they don't. I mean, they are there for everybody to see. Please go ahead. It's a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. It's an honor to have such words from you. And thank you, Cypher, PGI, and the Union for giving me this opportunity. I promise that I'll make up for the time. I'll not take a long time. I sense that the audience is far more familiar with tobacco control work. So, and my co-panelists are going to do a wonderful job. I already heard Dr. Monica and her presentation, which is quite detailed. So what I'll try to do is I will have 6 slides, and I guess I will have at least 6 minutes to give 1 minute to each slide. And copying from what the Director General of WHO is doing these days, which is one word tweets. I try to do 6 slides, each having a single word or at most a single phrase. And so in case if connectivity is lost, I doubt my friends Garima or Kritika would be able to actually read through slides. But let's hope that it doesn't happen. So first 3 slides, or the first 3 words, I sort of try to characterize tobacco industry. And as we heard from Dr. Arora, that the industry uses a range of tactics. So what I'm trying to do in this 6-7 minutes is to rather highlight what in my own experience and my learning from many of you, what I gather as the top priorities going forward in terms of preventing tobacco industry interference, particularly as it impacts our youth. And the last 3 slides, I will keep it for tobacco control advocates, so people in our own community, and will try to raise or flag some of the issues in this regard. I also will try to be deliberately provocative. So don't treat these as very empirical slides, but these are my thoughts. So let me start off then. The first slide is, thanks for putting it up. The industry is invisible, often in its literal sense. So what I mean is that even for researchers like us, it's not very easy to see tobacco industry. And I think there are 2 important aspects in which it acquires invisibility. One is that the industry often works through various front groups, right? And this is very common across globe, and particularly so in India too. We have already identified several front groups who speak voices of tobacco industry. They don't seem like tobacco industry themselves, and so it often appears like independent voices. And so these voices often get an audience in policy arena. And so I think that's one way in which industry remains invisible but exercises its influence. But beyond even use of front groups, what is more concerning in India is that the hardcore tobacco industry, let's say big time tobacco product manufacturers, often have varied identities. So they are often producing non-tobacco products, right? Let's take a case of the largest cigarette manufacturer in India, ITC. And we do know that they have a huge portfolio of non-tobacco items. Even though the revenues from these non-tobacco items are growing, we do know that the majority of profit still comes from the tobacco sector. And so in that sense, even though it is the largest cigarette manufacturer, it's not easy for common citizens and youth to easily pursue it as a tobacco company. And lately, what I also saw in practice is that this company is going to various government agencies and trying to convince, and often successfully, that it is not a tobacco company, that they have several other divisions. And so they often partner with government agencies in name of CSR and this is the problem. So this is how I say that tobacco industry remains quite invisible, and so it also is invisible to youth. And I think this is something we must do, must address. I really feel that we should think of regulatory ways in which we do not allow conglomeration of tobacco entities with non-tobacco entities. And then I come to the second slide, which is that the tobacco industry is omnipresent. It's everywhere. At least it is at all the places that really matter. So in some sort of a counterintuitive ways, while it is invisible, it is there where it matters. It is there in policy arenas in India. So for example, be it Niti Aayog, probably the topmost policy think tank of the government, the ITC has a partnership there. Several tobacco companies have partnerships or some sort of MOUs, right from local government to state governments, agencies. And in that sense, it is also omnipresent in terms of its products available to youth. Can we go to the third slide, please? So it's and lastly, the last thing I would like to talk about this industry is that and it's very concerning about the theme we are talking, because in marketing languages they say target market. So typically the companies define very specific audience to which they want to market their product, and there is no doubt that the tobacco companies have been with a great determination pursuing youth as their target market. I think Dr. Arora already highlighted various ways in which industry sort of reach out to youth. We recently in India had kind of a civil society report called Tiny Targets, and again we were able to learn various ways in which tobacco industry reaches out to youth. So this is about some of the concerns that I had about tobacco industry in India, particularly as it interferes in public policies and as it relates to the youth. Now let me come to some of the points I wanted to flag for discussion as it relates to tobacco control advocates and our own work in countering tobacco industry interference. The first one I would say is source versus symptoms. So if we look at tobacco sales happening, going up actually, tobacco use fortunately coming down but marginally, and so many tobacco users in our country, I rather see them as a symptom of a source, which is actually tobacco industry, right? As they say in infectious disease paradigm, that if you want to control malaria, you have to control mosquitoes, which are the vectors. So many have described tobacco industry as a vector. And so if we don't really target our regulatory and other measures at tobacco industry itself, then we are rather doing more like, mopping the floor to make it dry while the tap is on. So we have to also worry and make the tap off. So that's what I mean by really focusing on source. The second thing I wanted to highlight about tobacco control movement, and sorry to be judgmental, this is, I'm trying to be rather provocative. I really feel that a lot has been achieved in last couple of decades in India. And many of you are indeed tobacco control warriors, and it is because of you all that this has been possible. But I generally feel that we have done much progress in terms of bringing in more and more regulatory measures, right? And then grappling with in improving its better implementation. And this is certainly useful. I think what has not been done enough by us is to bring a normative change in society. Right, so the law cannot work on its own. I think we need to also invest more efforts in terms of how do we bring normative change in society where the tobacco industry is pursued very differently. And I think this is something that my co-panelist Vaishakhi and her efforts, but also many other organizations are sort of working on this aspect. The last slide I wanted to highlight is how do we see tobacco users in all this? And also, let's say, how do we see youth in all this? Do we see them as a problem. And unfortunately, I have seen many times the framing happening in a way that we often term tobacco users as if they are a problem. I do see photos, for example, in lockdown times of long queues of people wanting to buy BDs or wanting to buy pan masala in Gujarat, say, for example, and pity on them. But I think we have to keep in mind, like Honorable Health said in today's inaugural session, that these are our allies. We have to understand that they are not the problem. We need to rather reach out to them. They need support. Tobacco is known as the very highly addictive drug. Then if we don't see them as a problem, do we see them as victims? In some sense, yes, they are victims of tobacco industry, because tobacco is often an engineered addiction, right? Tobacco industry is trying to reach out actively and marketing actively to young people, and in sort of a tobaccogenic environment, it is not often an active choice. It is often that by falling prey to such aggressive marketing, free samples, etc., that the people get into tobacco addiction. However, if we only term them as victims, then also we are doing something wrong, which is that we don't appreciate the agency of tobacco users or the agency of our youth. And I think that's something that we should not do, because if you see how the whole ENDS, electronic nicotine delivery system industry and advocates are doing, is really to capture and build on the agency of the users, right? They're trying to say, oh, you have right, and we are trying to help you with some other so-called less harmful products. So I think we really, while keeping these things in mind, we really need to see tobacco users and youth as our partners and indeed as change makers. And I think that's the way to go forward. And I really hope that in order to make this possible, instead of just reaching out to them with IEC and the knowledge, we really have to enable youth in a way that they become change makers and they become the voice against tobacco industry. With that, I sort of conclude my presentation. Thank you again.
So thank you, Upendra. As usual, you have been quite intriguing, and those 6 words were quite powerful. And really, those 6 words remind me of all these nefarious strategies which this tobacco industry is being using. And it's very difficult to define tobacco industry. Like it's a very varied topic.